So welcome to our first lesson of Module 4. In this lesson we'll be learning about how we can control FMOD buses from within our Unity game. By the end of the next 2 lessons we'll know how to set up an interactive audio system for our player to control the audio levels of the game they're playing. In part 1 we'll be learning about how UI elements in Unity function and run. We'll also look at new ways we can create paths for multiple buses or events when using the same script on different game objects. So before we start this lesson, we're going to need to quickly do some setting up for ourselves. We're going to need to copy our music object from this scene we're currently in to the next scene we enter when the player travels through the portal in order to help us test to see if what we've been learning has worked over 2 different scenes. So to do this, just find your music object in the hierarchy tab, right click it, and click copy. Then in the project tab you're going to want to go to assets, 3D game kit, scenes, gameplay scenes, and you want to double click on level 2. Now it might take a while for the scene to load up, but once it has, move over to your hierarchy tab, find a bit of empty space, right click, click paste, and then play your game just to test that the music will play in this scene as well. So just like in the other scene, our music fades in nice and smoothly. Once you know your music's playing, you're going to want to leave the game and quickly save your scene by hitting Control or Command S. Then once you've done that, double click on level 1 to return to our original level. Right, so now that we're prepared and ready to go, the first thing we need to do in order to learn how to control FMOD buses in Unity is to make some for our events to pass through. Now buses in FMOD work just like they would in a traditional door, but first we need to go to the mixer window to access them, and it's here we'll be sending the channels or tracks that our audio is coming from into them, which allows us to process a collection of channels or tracks all at once. In this case, those channels will be our FMOD events we've been creating. Any buses you create will then send all their audio into the master bus, which you can see at the right of your screen here, which is then heard by the player in the game. Another way to quickly flick through FMOD's mixer and FMOD's event editor is to hit Control 1 or Command 1 on your keyboard to get to the event editor, or Control 2 or Command 2 to get to the mixer. Now on the left side of this window under routing, you'll notice a list of all the events we've created so far. It's here that we not only assign which event goes to which bus, but we can also create buses here too. In FMOD we have 2 types of main buses. We have a group and a return bus to choose from. We'll be looking more into how we use return buses in the next lesson, so for now, it's all about group buses. Now, a group bus acts as a traditional bus where we can send events and other buses into it. By sending multiple events or buses into a group bus, all of the audio signals sent are processed into one, allowing you to apply effects and control further routing to them all at once. Now, in order to create a group bus, we simply right-click in the routing tab, select New Group, and then give it a name. Alternatively, you could hit the new group button at the bottom here, like that. Now later on in this lesson, we'll be hooking up the group buses we make to the audio settings menu in our Unity game. Now in it, there are 3 options for the player to control. There's the master volume, music volume, and sound effects volume. Therefore, we'll need to create a group bus for each of those options. So seeing as FMOD already provides us with a master bus, we'll use that for the master volume. And then we'll use these 2 new group buses for the sound effects and music volumes. So let's right click them and change their name to music and sound effects. Now in order to send any of these events into these groups, we simply click and drag them into the appropriate group. Seeing as we only have 1 music event, let's click on it, drag it, and add it to the music group. Then let's highlight all of the other events, click on them and add them to the sound effects group. Now if we wish to, we could select one of our new groups and add effects to them in the same way we would to an event track. If we wanted to, we could also make one of these buses a child bus of another by simply dragging one onto another like that. So now the sound effects bus would be the child bus of the music bus. This means that all the events being sent to the sound effects bus would then be sent through the music bus as well before finally being sent to the master bus. In our case, we won't be needing that, so we're going to quickly undo that from FMOD. So now our buses are ready to be hooked up to Unity, but first, let's quickly take a moment to understand how the 3D Game Kit uses Unity's UI components to create an audio settings menu for our player to control. So UI stands for user interface, and in the context of most games refers to any 2D displays that give our player virtual information for them to interact with or use as they play their game. So health meters, pause menus, loading screens are all considered as UI elements. In Unity, all UI elements are displayed on a canvas game object, which displays them back to the player on their screen when they play the game. Now, if we take a look in the Hierarchy tab, underneath UI, we can see a game object called Menu Canvas that, when opened up, is also the parent of other canvas objects and various UI-based game objects as well. Now, all of these are currently disabled, represented by their grayed out tint, meaning they won't be visible to the player and can't be interacted with in our game. Now, if we select the Pause canvas, and click the empty tick box next to its name in the Inspector tab, we can then enable it, meaning we can now see it in our game. Now, as we can see, the canvas object is made up of multiple images and buttons. We can then open it up in the Hierarchy menu, and then open up either the UI background object or the BG object to see those buttons and those images as game objects. Now, what we're really interested in is the audio menu canvas and its child objects that our player can interact with to adjust their audio. So let's close those objects as well as the Pause canvas object, and let's also re-disable it, and then click on the audio canvas object and enable it, then open it up and open up the BG object attached to it. Now we can see our audio settings menu, 3 slider objects labeled master, music and sound effects, as well as other objects in our hierarchy for the back button and background image. Now, if we click on one of those slider objects, say for example the master volume slider, and look at the attached components in the Inspector tab, we can see a component called slider. Let's also quickly drag this little grey box down so it doesn't get in our way when looking at the slider component. Now, the slider component creates a UI slider for a player to control. With it, you're able to set the parameters and variables for the slider, such as the min and max value that can be set with it, its color, its size, and even which direction it slides in, as well as others. So for us, we're interested in 2 main parts of this component: the value of the slider and the box labeled on value changed. Now, this value variable represents the value that our slider is set to at any given time. By adjusting it now before the scene first starts, we can set the value that our slider will start at. Now, the grey box underneath, the one labeled on value changed, is actually called a Unity event. Not to be confused with our FMOD events, both are very different. Now, we won't be interacting with this Unity event until the second part of this lesson, so I won't go into too much detail on what a Unity event is just yet. But for now, know that we can use them to trigger public functions from other scripts, such as our bus control script, no matter what object that script is attached to. So we could write a script, create a custom function to, say for example, play a sound effect, attach that script to a game object, and then find that object, script, and function to play that sound whenever the player moves this slider. Something we will be doing later on. Now, both the music volume and the sound effects volume game objects have a slider component attached to them, just like this master volume slider object does as well. So in order to hook these sliders up to our FMOD buses, we're going to create a single script that we can place on all 3 game objects that will hook each slider component up to its respective bus. One final thing to note, however, before we proceed, is that in this lesson, we will be making edits to the menu canvas objects prefabs so that the changes will remain consistent throughout every scene. So let's quickly remind ourselves how Unity prefabs work and how edits to them can affect our scenes. Now, every scene in this game has a copy of the menu canvas object prefab put into it, as we've just learned. As we learned in the first module, every time a player leaves one scene and enters another, the previous scene will destroy all of the game objects within it, including the menu canvas, and the new scene will load in with a new copy of this prefab ready to go. Now, if we made changes to this object inside a scene, like we've been doing for most of this course, those changes would only exist within that scene, as a new scene would just load a copy of the original prefab without our changes. Therefore, if we want any changes that we make to this object to exist amongst every copy of this prefab in those scenes, we'll have to make those changes to the object in its prefab. Once we've made our changes to the prefab, any scene that our player enters will load a new copy of the menu canvas object with those changes included. Great, so now we understand how our Unity sliders work and how we plan on using them with FMOD. Let's quickly re-disable our audio canvas menu, then find our FMOD folder where we've been creating our scripts, create a new script which we are going to call F_bus control. Once it's finished compiling, we're going to add it to our prefabs. So in our folders, we're going to go Assets, 3D Game Kit, Prefabs, UI Prefabs, then double click on the menu canvas prefab to open it. So now that our prefab is open, let's find the first of our slider game objects, which is the master volume slider. So let's scroll all the way down the hierarchy tab, and there it is. So click on that. And we're going to go over to the Inspector tab, scroll down the list of game object components attached to it, And at the bottom, we're going to click Add Component and type F_bus control. We're then also going to delete the mixer slider link component by right-clicking it and selecting Remove Component. As our new script will now be performing its role essentially, and leaving it on with ours can cause some issues with the slider during runtime. Great, so all we have to do now is find both the music volume slider and the sound effects volume slider in the hierarchy tab, and then do the exact same thing to them. Add the F_bus control component and remove the mixer slider link. So I'm going to leave you to do that. Once you've set up all three of our slider game objects, you're going to want to open up the script F_bus control and edit it. So in our script, the first thing we're going to do, in a similar way to how we get an instance of our events, is create a bus variable using FMOD's Studio API to reference one of our buses. The way we do this is by writing inside our class fmod.studio.bus and give it a name which we will call bus. Now, as we learnt in our FMOD namespaces lesson, we can actually save ourselves some time by utilizing the FMOD and Studio namespaces at the top of our script rather than in our class each time we need them. So that's what I'm going to quickly do now. I'm going to delete these two namespaces we're not using and write using fmod.studio. And I'm also going to add, because I know we'll be needing it, using FMOD Unity. Then I'm going to come down to our variable and just remove the namespaces from the front of it. Next, we're going to delete the update function as we'll no longer be using it. And we'll use our start function to store our reference inside of our variable. So let's reference the name of our bus and write fmod unity.runtimemanager.getBus. And again, I'm going to get rid of the namespace because I no longer need it. Now let's pause for a second and take a look at what's going on here. We created a bus variable called bus, just like we would for an event instance variable. In the start function, we're then using the getBus command, which will find the bus we want in the same way we would write create instance to write the path to an FMOD event we wanted to store in an event instance variable. Now we'll be doing the same thing with this command, writing a path to the bus we want to store in our variable, but there are a few differences between these processes that you should take note of. The first of which is that we're not actually creating an instance of any of our buses. We're instead telling our code to reference the actual bus itself and not a copy of it like we do with our events. This means that if we were to create multiple bus variables and in each write the path to a specific bus, they'd all affect that same bus. However, if we create multiple event instance variables and wrote in each the path to a specific variable, a copy or instance of that event would be created for each variable, allowing us to treat and affect them all independently from the original, as well as each other. The second thing is that we want to set this script up so that it can be used for multiple sliders to each find their own bus. So instead of writing the path to a specific bus, we're going to use a public string here, which will be able to write the name of the bus we want for each slider in Unity's Inspector tab. So let's then quickly create a public string, and we'll call it bus path. Then inside the getBus command, we're going to start the string off by writing in quotation marks bus : in the same way we would start our event paths with event : Then this will be consistent for each game object using this script. Then add a plus and write the name of our bus path string variable. Now remember back to our C# basics lesson where we learned that you can combine strings together to form one whole one, as we did in a debug.log command. Here we're writing the start of our bus path in raw string data, followed by our string variable, which will store the rest of our bus path in it for each slider. So let's quickly take a break from this script, let's save it, and then let's jump back into Unity to see what it looks like on our slider objects. So once our script has finished compiling, our bus path variable will become serialized, and we're now able to give it a value for each component of it attached to one of our slider objects. It's in this box here that we're going to write the rest of our bus path for each slider. So just like our event paths, we want to write out the name of all of our parent buses, followed by the child buses attached to them, separated by /. Now if we take a quick look back at FMOD, we'll be able to see in our mixer window that both our sound effects group bus bus and our music group bus are not children of any parent buses. Therefore, we will only need to write the name of each bus on its own in our bus path variable. Now, at the moment, I currently have the music volume slider game object selected. So I obviously want to connect this to the music bus, so I will write its name, music, making sure to get the capital letter right at the beginning and that all of my spelling is correct to match the name of my bus exactly. Great, so next I'm going to come down to my sound effects volume slider object and do the same thing here. I'm going to write sound effects just like it was called in FMOD, as you can see here. Finally, I'm going to select my master volume slider game object, but I'm actually going to leave the bus path variable blank for this. The reason why is that FMOD master bus doesn't actually have a path to it. This is to prevent confusion between two buses if you were to create another bus, also called master bus. So in this case, our component will automatically hook this slider up to the master bus for us. So just to clarify, if we weren't using a string variable to create our bus paths, our music path would look like this, our sound effects path would look like this, and our path to our master bus would be left empty like this. Great! And now each component of our script will be hooked up to the correct FMOD bus. And that's everything for this part of this two-part lesson. Now we've learned a lot from editing prefabs to how Unity uses sliders as game objects and components. We've also got a script that will now connect 3 different sliders to 3 different FMOD buses by utilizing string variables with our paths in our code. In the next lesson, we'll be diving straight back into our FMOD bus control script, looking at how we can hook those sliders up to the actual levels of our buses. So once you're comfortable with what you've learned in this lesson, I'll see you in part 2.